Hi everyone, welcome to the Leading Numeracy Orientation. This is the third of a series of 3, so lovely to have you all with us for the final session of the Leading Numeracy Orientation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we come to this meeting. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for taking care of this country over countless generations. My name is Narissa Leung. I'm an education consultant here in Victoria. My contact details are on the slide here. I am @RisAl on Twitter and I'm AusLit teacher on all of the other pipes. If you would like to email me, I do not have an Edgemail account. I know, shock horror. So if you'd like to email me, it is narissaleung@gmail.com. And you do get a copy of all of the slides. So if you do think afterwards, I didn't write that email down, then just check it back in the slides and you'll be able to find my contact details. Okay, if you are new to the Numeracy Leader Orientation Series, what happens is it goes for an hour and a half. Fortunately, it's not me talking for the whole entire time. And I try to make it as interactive as possible. And there's a reason for that. There's good research that shows it needs to be interactive. Otherwise, you'll click on one of the other tabs that I know that you have open on your laptop right now. So I also like to share a quote to give you an idea about the reason behind why we have a back channel or a chat. So the link to the Padlet was sent out in the email from Basto. I think you would have received it yesterday. So the link is available on the screen there. And I really encourage you to have that chat open at the same time as this webinar so that you can share resources, share ideas, share your own experiences, put in links to other resources or websites or research that's relevant. And I was thinking about in our last webinar, I was really pleased with all of the chat that was going on in the channel and the sharing and really that idea of building a system of excellence. And it made me think about this book, Hotspots, which is a book that I was reading when I was doing the WISE program. And they said, I'm just going to read in here about what is a hotspot, because last week, I will constantly refer to the last session as last week. So in our last session, I really felt like this idea of a hotspot was starting to develop between the numeracy leaders who were attending the webinar. So what is a hotspot? You always know when you're in a hotspot. You feel energized and vibrantly alive. Your brain is buzzing with ideas and the people around you share your joy and excitement. These are times when what you and others have always known may become clearer, when adding value becomes more possible. Times when the ideas and insights from others miraculously combine with your own in a process of synthesis from which spring novelty, new ideas, and innovation. And I think it was really evident last time when I was introducing the Cotys 8 steps, and some of you were already familiar with that change process, but for you to share your resources and ideas and to really clarify your thinking around that. So at the moment, I think you are in a prime position to create your own hotspot as a group of numeracy leaders. And I think, I was thinking about it, I thought, we get into teaching so that we can make a difference. And you're in a position now where you can make a difference, not just for the students in your class, but for students in other classes in your school and even indeed across the state, if we get this part right, where we share resources and continue the conversation. So I do encourage you to use the resources within your group. I know there are a few tech-loving people. You might be able to set up your own space outside of these webinars to carry on the conversation. The Padlet that we have here, if you keep that link, you can continue to come back to that Padlet after the session. So come back, add more resources, add more thoughts, or go and check what other people had put on there. So I do encourage you to keep using that as a live resource rather than something that we forget about after today. So hotspots arise because people are excited and willing and able to cooperate with each other. It is these exciting, skillful, cooperative relationships that fuel the exchange of knowledge and insights that ignite a hotspot and create innovation. So in a sense, we can think of a hotspot as the sum of all the intellectual capital of the people within it. And if you think about the intellectual capital in this group right here, all of the numeracy leaders, then we've got some great ground to do some amazing things together and really, I guess be serious about reaching the education state targets. So I encourage you, maybe you could start a hashtag. I'm all about hashtags. Maybe you could start a Leading Numeracy or a Numeracy Leaders hashtag. Maybe someone could start a Facebook group and share the address for that in the Padlet. But I do encourage you to keep the sharing happening. All right, I'm going to hop off my soapbox. I'm really passionate about that. I just think you've got a really great start. So let's keep it going. Okay, so what are we talking about tonight? Well, I looked back at the survey, and thank you to those people who filled in the survey again for this session. And I really wanted to make sure that what we're talking about is targeted at what your needs are right now as a numeracy leader. So again, I went back to the first survey and I looked at leading others in the improvement journey. And it was interesting to see the feedback. A lot of people found that a really useful part of the last webinar. So today we're going to do a bit more of a focus on that leadership part of the role, because sometimes that's the part that makes us really nervous. So you might be in a position where you think, I'm really strong with the content of mathematics and numeracy, but it's actually getting other people to build their skills and leading the change that I'm a bit nervous about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight, influencing in the classroom, team and whole school environments. And we're also going to have a little bit of a look at the Maths Toolkit, actually the Numeracy portal and some of the resources there, because I was thinking about when this kind of scaffold of the Leading Numeracy Orientation webinars finishes, what do you need to be set up for success in your role as a numeracy leader? So I think we're going to start the webinar talking about the leadership component, and then we're going to look at what are the resources that you can go to after tonight is finished. I will just say another thing that came up quite a bit in the survey was that idea of resistance to change. And, as leaders, that's the thing that makes us so nervous. How am I going to get everyone to do it? So tonight I'll be mindful of that as well, and talking a bit about how do we bring everyone on board with this, or how do we work with resistance. So hopefully there'll be something useful for you in tonight's session. Learning intentions. Participants will develop an understanding of evidence-based strategies for leading change. So similar to last week, just with a different focus. Last time, see, I told you. A range of helpful tools, resources, and references for leading numeracy improvement in your school. So that's the what can I do next? So now that we've finished the webinar, we've finished the orientation sessions. The success criteria, you'll be able to describe some of the considerations for leading people through change, and you'll be able to list a range of tools and resources, and probably a long list of holiday reading. Always leave you with some books, you know that. Okay, so let's have a look back at last time. We talked about Cotys' 8 steps for leading change last time. I'm really keen to hear in the chat, what have you thought about? Since we talked about that eight steps, have you thought about it? Has it resonated? Have you trialed anything? Have you started putting something in motion at your school as a result of the learning? So I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about that, or if you have any other resources that link to Cotys' 8 steps. So when I'm thinking about leading change, I sort of have my own recipe, and there's 3 components to the recipe. The first is to know the process, and I use Cotys' 8 steps because it's easy to remember. There's only 8 things, and my brain probably can't handle any more than 8 things, so that's enough. So know the process is my first step. Know your people is the second step, and then know the product is the third. That's my own reference for leading change. So we've talked about know the process, and tonight we're going to go deeper into know your people, because that's a really critical part of leading change. And one that we touched on a little bit last week, but I want to go a bit deeper into that. Okay, so when we're talking about knowing your people, we're really looking at the second step on Cotys' 8 steps. So that idea of forming a guiding coalition. And I was really pleased to see some people in the survey and in the feedback from last week had said, whoa, I realise I can't do this by myself. I've got to go out and find a team. Great. I was really pleased with that. The thing is now we're going to get the right team. So one of the quotes that I really love around this idea of forming a guiding coalition is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So yes, I could run this whole numeracy thing in my school because I know what I'm talking about and I've just got this plan, I'm going to roll it out. But if I want to really bring about sustained change and I want to go far with this, then I need to bring a team on board to help me lead it. So who comes onto my team? Who do I choose? Okay. I would like to introduce you to this model, the diffusion of innovation model. You may be familiar with this model. I just, again, like Cotys 8 steps, I think it is, you can never be introduced to this enough because it always makes you stop and think, oh yeah, where am I now in the change process that I'm leading? So this diffusion of innovation model, and I will point out, I actually made this graphic. I'm so proud of it. It took me about 2 hours of my weekend because I didn't want to give anyone credit for it. So here, please admire that. Just put your comments about how pretty it is in the chat. I'd appreciate that. This is an Everett Rogers introduced this model, and he came up with this idea. He was doing research and he wanted to explain the how, the why, and what rate new ideas and technology spread. So he came up with this idea of adopter groups, and you can see the names of the adopter groups across the bottom there. So when we're talking about these adopter groups, I want you to be thinking about when I'm leading this numeracy change in my school, whatever it is, and you might be leading it at a PLC level, you might be leading it in a year level, you might even be doing it across the whole entire school. So whatever the change is, we need to be thinking about this in terms of that change. So there's a few references to technology in here, but this is absolutely applicable to any change, I believe. The other thing about this is I think the more we know about the people in change, the more we are able to work with resistance because we have more of an understanding about why that resistance might be happening. And so last time I spoke to you about that idea of we have to, as leaders, rather than getting furious when people aren't coming on board with us, we have to get curious. We've got to start asking, why is it that this person is not adopting, the process that I want them to adopt? Or why aren't they coming on board with the change? So I think knowing models like this can really benefit your understanding and the way that you work with people who might be resistant to the change. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch a video, and this is a video that the lovely Laura posted in the chat last time. So we're going to watch this short video, and then after I'm going to break down each of the groups and go through them in a bit more detail. And I do thank you for all those very kind comments in the chat that were just off your own bat. Well done. Okay, here's the video. This is available on YouTube, so if you want to access this, then just look for Diffusion of Innovation on YouTube.
Have you ever noticed that some people adopt new products or behaviors sooner than others? In 1962, Everett Rogers, a professor of rural psychology, developed a theory called the diffusion of innovations to explain this phenomenon. Rogers found that individuals within any society fall into one of 5 different adopter groups based on how early or how quickly they adopt an innovation. Rogers' theory tells us that if you want to promote the widespread adoption of a new behavior like these, you need to market to each adopter group differently, using distinct communication channels and messages. Let's look at each group to find out more. The innovators are a small but important group because they are always the first to learn about and adopt an innovation. They are risk-taking, adventurous, and like being on the cutting edge. The innovators are responsible for introducing innovations to the larger population because they share their experiences with their friends and communities. The early adopters are also a small, forward-thinking group and are often highly respected as opinion leaders. Their endorsement of an innovation plays a key role in what we call crossing the chasm, which is when the adoption of an innovation bridges the gap between the trendsetters and the majority. About 2/3 of people in a population fall into either the early or late majority groups. The early majority take time to make decisions. They will observe others' experiences and will only adopt the product once they are convinced it has real benefits and that it is the new status quo. The late majority are more resistant to change, though they are very responsive to peer pressure. They want innovations to be very well tested and widely used before they will risk trying it. Finally, the last group to adopt a new product or innovation is called the laggards. Laggards are highly resistant to change, and they also can be hard to reach with marketing campaigns because they often have very minimal exposure to media. Laggards wait until an innovation is completely mainstream before they adopt it, and in some cases, they never do. Think of some global innovations in recent years. Social media, for example, spread very fast and many people adopted it within a few years. Other innovations, such as the use of solar power, spread much more slowly and may take decades to reach widespread adoption. So the next time you're promoting a new product or behavior, consider the theory of diffusions of innovations and tailor your communication channels and messages. This will improve your chance of catalyzing widespread adoption.
Okay, I should have warned you. I know your maths people, the numbers didn't add up to 100%. They had made an error. It was 12, and they had 12.5% for the second group of adopters. It should have been 13.5%. If you were sitting there saying, oh my goodness, that doesn't add up to 100, that's why. So I really like that video because it makes you think about the different people and the different adoption categories in your own school and in things that you've led probably in the past. I think I always like to look at past, and I see someone ask a question about how do you work out who's in which group. I do think that the past is a good predictor of what might happen this time. So it's all about knowing your people, and that's going to really be the theme that comes up a lot when we're talking about it tonight. So before I go into talking about each of the adopter groups in a bit more detail, I just want to mention that we change groups based on what the innovation is. So just because we are early adopters for one particular innovation that's being brought in doesn't mean we're always an early adopter. Just because we're a laggard for one thing doesn't mean we're always a laggard. So just need to think about it's different depending on lots of different things. So it might be depending on the innovation. It might be depending on who's leading the innovation. It might be depending on whatever's going on in your life at the moment. So there's lots of different reasons. So an example is, for me, I love technology. So for me, I would always say I'm at the front, I'm on the left. So I was either an innovator or an early adopter when it comes to technology. However, for other things, maybe that I'm not so passionate about, I might be further down the bell curve. I don't think we ever like to admit that we're, the red group, but I think we have probably all been there at some stage. So do think about that these groups, that you're not labeled that for life. I think have a think about when you've been in each of those groups. Okay, so let's talk about this in terms of, I'm just going to use an example of if we're introducing, so something that you're introducing in your PLC or year level or whole school. So for example, if we want our students to speak mathematically, we want them to use the vocabulary involved in maths. So that's the thing that I've decided that I'm going to roll out across my setting. So we've done all this research, we've done our evaluate and diagnose stage, and we really recognise that our students weren't using the vocabulary of mathematics. So they were using informal language, they weren't really sure of what the different vocabulary meant. And we knew we believe that's affecting their ability to really get deep and understand the maths that we're trying to introduce them to. So, great, I'm going to introduce this idea of explicit vocabulary instruction in the mathematics classroom. Okay, so the first group are the innovators, and we saw this on the video. Generally imaginative, risk takers, adventurous, and creative. That is not always the case, but in this, it's a bit of a risky field to be in, the innovators, because you're trialing lots of different things, and you know that they're not always going to work. And in fact, lots of them will probably fail. That's okay. And you're okay with that if you're an innovator, because I guess you're sort of a little bit addicted to the thrill of finding new things. So this is especially true when technology was really booming. You know, people line up for phones, or people line up for new technology because we're really excited about testing out new things and seeing where this is going to go. And we know that some of the technology that we're using was not going to last. So we could name like Google Wave. There's one that didn't last. There are lots of things that didn't last, but that was okay because we knew that that's part of the risk of being at the front. So here, and I mentioned this in the last webinar, there's an issue with innovators is that they're really hard to follow, because people who are further back in the bell curve look at these people and say, like me, they would look at me and say, yeah, that's Riss. She just loves technology. That's her thing. You know, that's not my thing. So I can't do what she's doing, or I can't use all of those things that she's using. So these people aren't always the right people, don't just use innovators when you're trying to lead change, I think is what I'm trying to say. So if you just use these people, they don't have as much credibility all of the time, because they are just trialing new things all the time. The important thing about the video, and this is why I think you really need to understand this diffusion of innovation model, is because when you're planning change, you need to communicate to each of these adopter groups differently. And that's one of the things that we haven't been great at in schools. We have said, right, I'm introducing this new academic vocabulary, and this is how I'm introducing it, and it's just, you know, one size fits all in terms of communication. So here, when you really understand this concept of adopter groups, you can see why we need to change the communication. So here I've put down does anyone remember that show Beyond 2000? And we used to watch it after 60 Minutes on a Saturday night or Sunday night. And they used to show all these really cool fandangled technologies that were going to arrive in the world after the year 2000. I don't know, maybe you weren't around then, but it was, you know, we looked at it and we were like, wow, this is completely going to revolutionize the world. All this brand new tech, everything's going to be so different. The people in this group, the innovators, that excites them. All of that idea of a complete revolution, brand new things. Hoverboards just never made it. That show was total rubbish. I remember watching a holographic car on there. Anyway, I digress. So the communication for this group, what excites them, what gets them on board is that whole kind of Beyond 2000, you know, really exciting risk-taking type of communication. All right, so then we move into the next group, the early adopters. Now, the early adopters, these are the people that you as numeracy leaders need to buddy up with. So the early adopters generally are resilient, they're thoughtful, and they have a lot of credibility with the rest of the staff in the area of the innovation. So they're viewed as opinion leaders by the rest of the staff. So the people in this group are the first followers. So basically, the idea is that they wait to see what the innovators are trialing all these different things. And I always use, in my running group in Bendigo, one of the girls in there buys lots, and she just loves, she's an innovator. She tries all the latest gadgets and gizmos to make us run faster. And so she went through this stage of buying all the latest watches, the running watches. Her budget is a lot bigger than mine. So as an innovator, she would try all these different watches, sometimes for only a week, and then if she realized it wasn't what she wanted, then she'd sell it. As an early adopter, I was watching what Ada said about it, and I would say, and waiting for her review. And then once she finally come up with, yes, this watch, this is actually the one, I really recommend this one out of, you know, the 10 that I've tried, that's when I came on board, and then I bought that watch. So I waited until the dust had settled. I waited until one of the products that she had trialed came to the top, and she said, this is the one. So she did all of that, you know, the heavy lifting for me, and then I just went out and bought the one that she'd recommended. I was the first follower. And then I went to running, and then I, you know, started selling it to everyone else. So early adopters are the first followers, and the research says it is what this group of people say about the innovation that determines its success. So if this group go and say, this new approach, this academic vocabulary that we're introducing to our maths classrooms, this is the way, then the rest of the bell curve people will come on board. If this group says, not really a fan of it, then your innovation is going to stop right there. So there's lots of reasons that you need to work out who your early adopters are. The early adopters are also, they're very resilient. So they do understand that it is not going to be a perfectly formed package. When I go to my staff and I say, okay, we're going to introduce this academic vocab, I think this is how we'll do it. I think we might introduce the words on a Monday. I think we might use the phrase chart on a Tuesday. I think we might, on a Wednesday, we might do this. Let's trial that. Then you can use the early adopters to iron out the creases because they're resilient. So they know it's not perfect. They expect it to have some validity, but it won't necessarily be perfect. And they can help you to trial it on a small scale. That's why PLC is so effective, before you take it out to the masses and say, okay, this is what we're going to trial on a larger scale. So the communication for this group, I've put there I have a dream. So I've got a dream and I've got a bit of an idea about how I'm going to achieve it. Come on board with the dream. So it's not quite as scary as the first one because I do have some type of idea about how we're going to achieve the dream, but I still want to be, a part of something really exciting. Okay, the next adopter group are the early majority. And in here, the characteristics generally measured, cautious, observant, because these people are waiting to see what the early adopters have to say about the innovation before they'll consider taking it up themselves. They need solid proof. They want to know that success has happened. And this is why PLC models are so effective. We've trialed it on a small scale, and now I can stand up and confidently say to the next rollout, yes, our PLC trialed this academic vocabulary approach, and this was the impact, and here's our data to show the impact. So this group really want to know, how can I I know what I'm doing now, and I just want to be able to do that a bit better. So how is this going to help me to make my life better or easier? So you have to really change your communication to be aware of what these people care about and what they're trying to achieve, and then be able to communicate with them how your innovation, whatever it is, will help them to achieve that purpose. So they do like low risk. So if you go out and do a Beyond 2000, advertisement to this group, they are not going to be jumping on board. They will be sitting there thinking, this sounds too risky for me. Not just for my own personal risk, so I might be exposed as not having the knowledge to teach academic vocab. It's also the risk for their students. So Thomas Guskey has an article that he talks about every teacher believes that what they're doing is in the best interest of their kids. And as leaders, sometimes that's hard for us to believe if someone's doing something in a complete opposite way than what we think they should be doing it. But if we come from that viewpoint, that teacher truly believes that what they're doing is in the best interest of their kids, when we introduce a change like this, I know that you like doing it like that, but we want you to now teach in this way. The risk for them is that they risk their students learning less well than what they're doing at the moment. And that's scary for people who are in the later adopter groups. So here, the communication is really customer testimonials, who's done this and who's been successful. Or maybe, this teacher from this school's had a lot of success in this specific thing that we're working with. So let's have a chat to them. So just got to be really careful about your communication with this group. The late majority, this is a really interesting category, the late majority. The late majority are often skeptical and risk avoiders, which is the further you go to the right of the innovation bell curve, the more risk you want to avoid. The second dot point there I think is really important. They're driven by the fear of not fitting in. So this group really, the peer pressure on this group works both ways. So they're sort of sandwiched between the early majority of people and the laggards. So they have on the right-hand side of them, they've got the early majority thinking, I might go with this innovation. I might try this new approach. And then they have on their left side, the laggards saying, nah, not doing that. And here's a whole bunch of reasons why. So the late majority are sitting there thinking, which group do I go with? Do I go with the early majority because I might miss the train? I don't want to miss the train. I want to be where everyone is. Or, actually the laggards, they got a really good point. I agree with what they're saying. I think I'll just stay with them. So it can be tricky being in the late majority. So that's what we need to think about when we're working with this group. And I guess probably when we're working with the laggards, the influence that the laggards have on the late majority is something to consider. So for the late majority to adopt a change, it has to be really well tested. So they need really solid evidence, and you need to remember that the data isn't always enough. So handing over the numbers and saying, our kids got 7 on that test and they got 10 on that one, so therefore this is better. So you've got to really find out what matters to these people and use that in your communication with them. So I've said for the communication, testimonials, case studies, evidence, lots of going over the, why you need to jump on board with the early majority kind of communication. And the other recommendation for this group is to emphasize the risks of being left behind. So there's a risk with adopting the innovation, but there's also a big risk of being left behind and not adopting it if most of the people join with the early majority. And the final group are the laggards. It's a pretty negative name. I think they're probably better words that we can use instead of laggards. But obviously, or not actually, I'll take that back. It's not obviously. Generally, they could be seen as conservative and reluctant. Try to avoid risks at all costs. And their job is to do what they can to make sure the late majority don't join the change. Because if the late majority do join the change, then eventually it looks like they're going to have to change as well. So sometimes this can play out if you're running a PD and the laggards are sitting there thinking, I don't want to have to change what I'm doing. I'm really comfortable doing what I'm doing. And so they might present as a squeaky wheel, that across the staff room says, yeah, what about this? What about this? We've done this before. That didn't work in the past. And sometimes the reason for that calling out is to try and convince people around them and to sort of place that seed of doubt that maybe, actually, they're right. Maybe we shouldn't be going with this. I will say, I think you need to be careful with generalizing the laggards as always being really negative, because sometimes the things that they have to say are actually really valid points. And sometimes we do really need to consider some of the questions and the wonderings that they have around the innovation. So even though at the time you get really frustrated with this kind of resistance that might be provided by the laggards, in the long term, it strengthens your understanding of what it is that you're trying to bring about, the change, and it forces you to strengthen your understanding of why. Is this the right way? Lots of things like that. We don't always appreciate it right at the time, but afterwards you should look back and say, actually, that made me a stronger leader, or it helped me to lead that project more effectively because I did get questioned. So for this group, lots of statistics, proof, testimonial. Again, that reminder that everyone else is coming on board. And I will say, thank you, Jason, for mentioning the alternate on the chat. I will say that this group here, we shouldn't always deal with them in front of everyone else. Or, I don't mean deal with them, but we shouldn't always engage in that backwards, forwards across the staff room, well, what about this? And then providing the answer. We have to really be measured in our response and try it initially to work with these people one-on-one to remove that whole staff audience, because we don't want everyone else listening and kind of the doubt starting to fill the room. Okay, so in the early stages, my own advice is don't water the rocks, but you can work out how that plays out for you. But you do need to work with these people in the later stages. I think in schools, one of the things that we do is we say, okay, I'm going to introduce this change and I'll get the coach to work with that person because they are going to be so hard to move. What we need to be doing is saying, I'm going to put all of my resources into the people who are going to bring other people on board. They're my early adopters. So I'm going to identify them. I'm going to provide all the supports and resources to the early adopters, because they are going to influence the early majority, who will influence the late majority, who will influence the laggards. So rather than sort of putting our coaching and resources right at the other end and somehow trying to work backwards, does that make sense? If you think about some of the initiatives that you've worked on in your school, which way were you working? Were you working backwards and trying to influence from the back? Or did you roll it out saying, well, these are the early adopters, these are the early majority, then the late majority? Okay, so again, I will encourage you to think about a time, when have you been in each of these adopter categories? So what was an innovation that you were part of where you were an innovator? What was an innovation that you were part of where you were in the late majority? And then think about why. What put you there? So I'm going to make a confession. I was thinking, I better provide an example of when I was a laggard. And I thought, well, of course I've never been a laggard. I'm always at the front. Actually, I have. When I thought about it, I thought, yeah, I have been a laggard. I was a laggard in something to do with technology, which is unusual, because usually I would find myself right at the front and be very proudly saying, yes, I'm an early adopter. So when it comes to iPads in classrooms, absolute laggard. And I think this is why it's useful for me, or useful for everyone, to think about when were they in these adopter groups and why, because it helps us to understand the people in that group. So for me, with iPads in classrooms, they were being rolled out everywhere, everyone was doing it, and I just had a few questions. And it really, I thought about, why am I resistant to this? Why am I not lining up and buying all these shiny devices for our kids? And for me, it was because it didn't align with my beliefs. So I have really strong beliefs around rigorous activities, and around creation, not consumption, and around student voice and agency. And I couldn't see evidence that the iPads that everyone else was buying and putting in front of their kids was supporting these beliefs. And that was just for me. I'm not recommending this for you, but it certainly helped me thinking about it. It helped me to think, yeah, actually, I was a laggard, and it wasn't because I was stubborn. It wasn't because I hate all change. It was because I had really valid concerns, and I still think they remain concerns, but that's a different issue. So I think what would have helped me in that group, what would have helped me to come on board with the iPad change, I definitely needed more evidence of other people having this rigorous curriculum using the iPads. I needed more research. And I guess I just needed more testimonials, which is, all the stuff that I've just talked about communication-wise. What I didn't need was more really inspiring speeches around how iPads are the future and everyone's going to get a job with an iPad. So that's the type of communication that's good for the innovators and the early adopters. But as a laggard, that absolutely was not helping me. It was hindering, because I thought, well, that just reinforces you don't have the research. So think about when you were a laggard and what did you need, because that will help you to work with people who you think are in that category for whatever it is that you're rolling out. Okay, so done a lot of talking. We've thought about lots of the adopter groups. In your resource pack, I have put a copy of my incredibly colourful innovation bell curve there. So I want you to think about the change that you are thinking about bringing in your school. And I want you to think about, what does your adoption curve look like? And sometimes doing this will just help you to understand, whoa, actually, I don't know my staff enough to be able to work out where they might be on the adoption bell curve. And so you will have homework for yourself between now and, when you start rolling this out next year. I've got to get to know these people to work out where they might place themselves on this adoption curve. That's not to say they can't change. So I want you to think about, what does your adoption curve look like? Do you need to learn more about your staff? And how might you use the learning from this to help you to lead the change in your school? So you could write people's names on there. You might use initials or do some type of coding system. Don't leave it laying around. But I think just have a think about the people in your group. Okay, I wish I could provide you with some more time for that, but I think just to start your thinking off, obviously you'll think about this in more detail afterwards and as you start to get into the change. Someone asked a question about communicating with the whole staff. Thank you for that. And I will just say, I think it's really about the protocols that you use. So if you're not familiar with the idea or the concept of protocols, there are lots of resources that you can access to give you good protocols for discussion. So Protocols at Work, I think, is a good book. There's, I'll think of some more and I'll put it in the chat later, just for different protocols, discussion protocols that you can engage in to get everyone having a conversation irrespective of which group they're in. I can tell you people don't respond well to saying, can all the laggards go and sit on that table, please? So I do recommend using discussion protocols. The other reason for using protocols, so you might have a, like a 2-minute round on your table, or one that I've used is a donut discussion. So people stand in a circle, an inside circle and an outside circle, and then you put a prompt on the board, and then everyone talks about that prompt, and then the outside circle moves one step. And then the last question I ask is, do you have any more questions, or do you have any wonderings about this or any worries? So I get them to discuss that, and when they go back to their tables, then I get them to write their question or their wondering or their worry on a sticky note, and then put that on collate those together so that you, in your own time, not in front of everyone, have the chance to go through all of those questions, worries, wonderings, and to work out, how can I address these? Which ones need addressing whole staff? Which ones need addressing individually? So it just gives you, as a leader, you don't have to feel that stress of having to shoot back answers straight away. So hopefully you might find that helpful. I do like, Jason said that if you ask the laggards to sit on a table, it'll take them a long time to move. Very funny. Okay, so in addition to that model, the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovation, I want to introduce you very quickly to another model that might be useful for you, and particularly with helping to understand resistance. So even though I don't think it was specifically about managing resistance, but I think it's useful to help you with reflecting as you're engaging in this change or leading this change, to say, this isn't going quite how I thought it was going to. What's happening? What do I need to work on? Okay, so the idea of this is Nostos' model, and he proposed that there were several ingredients put together that equal success in leading change, complex change. So the first thing he said was vision. Well, we heard that last time with Cotys' 8 steps. He said we need skills, and I spoke a bit about this with the principal group, that we do, particularly in the area of maths, where we might have maths anxiety. Our staff members might have maths anxiety, which affects their ability or their keenness to teach maths. So we need the skills. We need incentives. He wasn't talking about performance pay or anything like that. He's talking about, we need to know what's in it for us. So let's say, for example, I'm a secondary maths leader and I am trying to get numeracy going across the school. I've got the history teacher sitting there saying, yeah, nice, but what's in it for me? Like, how am I going to benefit from this? I got to teach all this history stuff. So the incentives need to be intrinsic, or we know the research says they are better if they're intrinsic, and Daniel Pink's done a lot of work in that area. Some extrinsic, chocolate frogs, for example. So we need incentives as part of this managing complex change. We also need resources. This is not a surprise to us. So we need access to all of the things that which we are now so resource rich with the numeracy portal and things like that. But we need hardware resources. So we need the counters, we need the whatever physical resources we have in our classrooms. We need an action plan, and talked about the action plan when we're talking about Cotys' 8 steps. And, the difference between that in that research where they said everyone should be healthy versus here's a specific action to take, everyone swap out your full fat milk for light milk, and more people engage. So we need to have a plan for where we're going. So if we have these 5 things, he says, we will have success in leading our change. What happens though if one of these is missing? So let's have a look. What happens if we don't have the action plan? So I've got this great idea. I've gone out. So if let's say we're doing this vocab thing. So I've got my vision. Everyone's going to be teaching vocab in every classroom. All those kids are going to be using academic vocab. Teachers have got the skills because we've provided lots of PD. We've got incentives because people know that if their kids understand this, it's going to help them with their subject and in other areas of their life. Got all the resources, got everything we need to teach. Just not really sure how we're actually going to do it. So you can kind of work out how you do that in your own classroom, but by the end of the year, it needs to be working. If we are missing the action plan, he says this leads to false starts. So this, some people might do it this way, and then actually that's not very effective. So let's start again. Let's try doing academic vocab this way. And then, oh no, actually that's not working either. Okay, what happens if the resources are missing? So we've got everything in place. We've PD'd everyone. We've got the plan. This is what we're going to teach on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. If we don't have the resources, this leads to frustration. And you have probably been in an experience just like this, where I've said, yes, all right, we're ready to go. I've got all the knowledge. Oh, I don't have access to this. That used to be the case when we used to have to pay for internet in schools. So when we used to have to get the kids to, go to the library and borrow a laptop and have internet, don't have internet. Great, now we can't do this lesson. Frustration. If we don't have incentives, if we don't have this is usually really connected to the why. So if we don't really understand the why, if we can't see what's in it for us or for our students, because we remember all the teachers are doing what they really believe is in the best interest of their kids. If we don't have the incentives, then we can get resistance, because it's like me with the iPads, I don't really believe this is in the best interest for my kids, so there's not really a big incentive for me to take on this new practice. If we don't have the skills, so if we don't take the time, and it needs to be ongoing support, as we saw last time with the research around effective numeracy teachers, if we don't have the skills and we've got everything else in place, this can lead to anxiety. And there's already enough maths anxiety in the world. We don't need any more. So this is really about knowing your staff, knowing who needs which support, or what type of support is going to be more effective for different people. And finally, if we don't have a vision, it leads to confusion. We're not really sure. And I noticed someone on the chat mentioned learning intentions before, and I think learning intentions is probably a really good example of this. When learning intentions was first brought out, this is before the hits came about, I think in lots of schools, we didn't really know why we had to do this. Someone said that learning intentions, we should do this. And so we really lacked that vision. And so we knew the how, we knew we had to do it at the start of the lesson, had to be on the board, all of that, but we didn't understand the vision. Well, what is this going to achieve doing this? And so it did lead to confusion, and that confusion led to the practice being watered right down and eventually slipping away in the background. And then thankfully HITS has come out, and we now understand the why behind the learning intentions. So this is just another model that might help you to think about when you're leading the change, to say, are we missing one of these? Like, do we need to go back and do some more work around the skills? Or do we need to make sure that we've got the resources there for whatever it is that we're asking people to do in their classrooms? Okay, that completes our discussion around the models for leading change. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes just to look at your resource pack and reflect now to say, well, how might these assist me in the leading change part of my role? So I'd love to see your thinking in the chat. What questions do you still have? And we'll be back in 3 minutes. Okay. I just see in the chat someone saying that they're now thinking about a different change they're leading in their school, the SWPBS, and that's totally fine. Change is change. So use this model for all change that you're trying to bring about in schools. It's always good to be able to reflect using models like this. Okay, so here's here's the exciting part. As if all of that wasn't exciting. That is exciting. I love the leadership part of it. It is so complex, but it's so exciting when you can see movement. So do keep, and I did say last time, this is just the tasting plate. It's just the introduction to the leadership challenge and the ways that you can lead the change. So do invest in your own education and go and find books and resources to continually learn about this. I personally just think the more models you learn about, the more effective you are at working with resistance, because it helps you to understand maybe why that person is not coming on board. So I think I've introduced you to a couple of models, but there are so many more out there, and I just don't think you can know about enough of them. Okay, so the second part of the webinar tonight, I am going to talk about some resources for you to move forward for you as numeracy leaders. So what are the things that you might need access to or that could support you in supporting other teachers in your school or across the state? So you should have hopefully already received your hard copy resource, the resource kit for numeracy leaders. It might not look exactly the same as this one, but hopefully you've received that. If you haven't, I do recommend checking in at the office. Those office people, sometimes they can hold on to things. So check in the office first before you start emailing into the department saying you haven't got one, but hopefully they've all gone out, and there'll be some of the resources I'm going to talk to you about tonight are available in there, but they're all available online anyway. So I've got some presents for you. Here we go. Look at this. So unprofessional. It's a GIF. There. That's how excited I want you guys to get about these presents. So the first present you will have already received. But I think I've got about 4 gifts for you tonight in terms of resources. All right, so firstly I wanted to go back to this. This was the data that we collected in the first survey to see what you wanted us to talk about. And I noticed on here that more than 50% of you, more than half, said, have you explored the numeracy portal? Yeah, kind of. So I wanted to bring your attention to some of the resources that are available in here. We, as I said before, have access to so many resources now, and sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's not such a great thing because there's so many there, we're not really sure what's actually there. So I have done a little bit of ferreting around, and I've found some ones that I think will be real gems for you. Okay, so the first present has already been emailed to you. It's on the Victorian. You can access it through the numeracy portal. And you can just click on the Maths Teaching Toolkit and you will have access to this now. It is a map, an interactive map, I might add, that can help you to navigate your way around that toolkit. So if you click on any of the words in here, it'll take you to the site. It sort of helps you. If you're familiar with the literacy toolkit, they've got a similar one. So you can click on this and say, oh, okay, so that's right. That's where I find that resource. If it has a little video camera next to the name, that means there's a video attached to it. So you can click straight onto there and go to that resource. So I think this is something that would be really useful for you in your role and hopefully save you some time kind of clicking all over the websites, trying to work out where the resources are. Very happy with this. That's your first gift. And you've already received that one. So, okay. The next gift is also available on the Vic Numeracy portal. And I'm going to explain it to you first before I tell you how to find it, because I think you might get distracted if I tell you how to find it first. And it's also in your hard kit anyway. So it is the Numeracy Learning Progressions resource. If you joined us last week for the webinar, the numeracy webinar, and I invited Grant from the department in, and Grant was talking about the Maths Online interview, and he was talking about growth points. And so he said, in counting, there's these different growth points, and usually it means that you can do this growth point before you can do this one, sort of a continuum of skills. And I'm sure some of you are sitting there thinking, oh, well, that'd be so useful if we had that for every topic in maths and not just for the junior students. You know, especially secondary teachers, we're sitting there thinking, well, that's great for the primary school teachers. What about us? So this resource is for you. This is sort of like growth points, but it's across all areas of the numeracy curriculum. And even though, the original one was created by ACARA, so the Australian curriculum, but, you know, we do great work here in Victoria, so we've actually mapped it to the Victorian curriculum. So I'm going to play this video that I have mashed up from the ACARA website. They do mention the Australian curriculum, just substitute Victorian curriculum there. And this will give you a bit of an overview about what we're talking about with learning progressions.
The progressions are a resource for teachers which describes common pathways for aspects of literacy and numeracy development. By providing detail of the developmental sequences of literacy and numeracy learning, the progressions support the learning areas in the Australian curriculum. The progressions give teachers a tool that can assist in developing targeted teaching and learning programs for students that support individual progress. The progressions provide a detailed map of how students become increasingly proficient in aspects of their literacy and numeracy development. Numeracy. The numeracy progression has 3 elements that reflect aspects of numeracy necessary for successful learning. The 3 elements are number sense and algebra, measurement and geometry, and statistics and probability. Each element has a number of sub-elements, then indicators grouped together to form developmental levels. The progressions support schools in their systematic approaches to literacy and numeracy development. They support teachers to cater for the diversity of their learners, acknowledging students' different starting points and their different rates of progress. They allow teachers to identify where their students are in their literacy and numeracy development and what each of their students needs to do to be able to progress. They support students in their learning.
Okay. So that just provided a bit of an overview so you can understand the big picture of these learning progressions. So on the numeracy portal, the Vic Numeracy portal, you actually can download a learning progression map. So for all of the learning progressions that are available. And as you saw there, they have the elements, the sub-elements, and the indicators. Okay, so in order to explain this, I've just got the element here I've got is number and algebra. So down the left-hand side, they have the sub-elements. So there's quantifying numbers, there's additive strategies, multiplicative strategies, all of these things. And then going across the right-hand side, these are the indicators. So what will students be able to do or say at each of these points? Okay, so just so you can get a better understanding, I'm going to zoom in on one and we're going to have a look at one so you can really see how these things work. So let's have a look at, I think I've put in number patterns and algebraic thinking. Okay, so you can then download an A3 sheet, looks like this, and this is number and algebraic thinking, and at the top it gives you an overview of what you're looking for. Sometimes I really like these because they're in plain English. So especially for any teachers that we have who might have maths anxiety or might have low confidence in teaching maths, I think the overview is very inclusive and very teacher friendly. So it's plain English. It's really nice to see. Sometimes some of those overviews can actually include information about common misconceptions for that area of maths. I think that's really helpful as well. So that's the overview. And then down below that, you can see that this one spans, and that's why I chose this one, because it spans from foundation through to level 9. So if I have a student in my class and I can see I'm working on algebraic thinking and they're able to do this skill, I'll be able to use this to say, well, where could I push them next? Or if they're maybe a little bit behind the rest of the students, I can say, okay, well, where are they on this continuum? And what's the next skill that they need to be able to work on? And how can I use this to help me differentiate my teaching? I just think this resource is so amazing, as does someone else in the chat. So this, I don't think we haven't got enough communication about this out in schools. Not everyone knows about this amazing resource. That's why I wanted to bring it to your attention. So down the bottom, as I said, it just shows the span of learning in that sub-element and says what a student says does or produces. And it's on a continuum. So what are the students likely to need to know before they know whatever it is that I thought I was going to teach in the next lesson? They need to know these things first. So it definitely can help you and your teachers differentiate, especially if your teachers don't necessarily have really strong content knowledge. This can help to build their content knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to provide you with 3 minutes. In the resource pack, I've actually included a copy of that, the number patterns in algebraic thinking. I did have to snip off the bottom because it wouldn't all fit onto an A4 because they're usually printed in A3. So what I want you to do is read through that learning progression, and I want you to think about how might you use these resources in your school. So this is just one learning progression. You can get these for loads of different sub-elements and and the 3 different elements as well. So 3 minutes, I'd love to see your thinking in the chat. If you've already used this resource, then share with us how you've used it so other people can learn from your experience. So we'll be back in 3 minutes. Okay, I can see you are fans of this gift. Don't mention it, guys. Don't mention it. I've given you this gift. I know. So I think it is so lucky to have this. And I just wish that I had access to this when I was teaching. Definitely, I love all of your suggestions in the chat there. I think really strong for building teacher content knowledge and really a great resource for helping me to differentiate, particularly for those students who aren't in the middle here where I want everyone to be. So if they're struggling, where do I need to point them? What are the things that they need to be working on next? And if they're in front of where the rest of the class are, what can I be doing to push them even further? Really great for, and it's F to 10. So very inclusive of all teachers and all students as well. All right, we must move on. So that's something to look at over the holidays. Oh, now I'll show you where to find it, now that you're all excited about it. So on the numeracy portal, scroll down a bit and you'll see this button here, the Maths and Numeracy Assessment button. That's got some really good resources on there. So on there, you want to scroll to where it says Numeracy Learning Progressions, and it takes you to this website, the VCAA website, and you'll just scroll down. Don't worry, I know I've just done that really quickly. There's 100 clicks. You will get the slides for tonight, so you can just flick back through the slides so that you can work out how to follow this where I'm taking you. At the bottom of that page, this is where you can download each of the A3 documents. So on the screen, I've just got some of the ones that are available for number and algebra. Could you imagine printing that, you're doing a unit of work on multiplicative strategies, and we print that off so we can have a discussion in our PLC about the general continuum, and then before we engage in our planning. Wow. All right. That was the first present. Now the second present, the third I'm up to. Oh, God, I can't even count. I'm doing a maths webinar. The third present is for secondary teachers. And I am looking at you, secondary teachers, because you are sitting there thinking primary school teachers get everything. Well, this gift is just for you. So it might be useful for primary, but it's definitely useful for secondary. So again, we're on the Victorian Numeracy Portal website. You're going to scroll down and you're going to go to that same button, the Maths and Numeracy Assessment button. It's a good button. Press it, everyone. Not right now, though. Don't do it right now. We need to explain what it is. Okay, then you're going to scroll down. You're going to go back to the Victorian Numeracy Learning Progression, so the same place that I just sent everyone to access those A3 documents. When you get to the VCA website, the same place you were before, you are going to scroll down to this, where did the National Numeracy Learning Progressions come from? The part at the bottom there, and you're going to click on that. This is going to take you to the ACARA website, so that's for the national curriculum. That's okay, we're very inclusive. What you want to hit on here is the Numeracy Learning Progression. I know this is 100 clicks, but you'll get the slides. And the magic button for you, the present, the gift, is here, View Learning Area Advice. So I'm a numeracy leader in a secondary school, and I'm trying to find out how can I bring the rest of the teachers who aren't maths teachers on board. I've got the science crew, I've got the maths, I've got the PE crew, I've got the arts crew, I've got the humanities people that don't want anything to do with me and my maths. This is your toolkit to help you to work with these people and to understand how you can bring them on board with this whole numeracy deal. So when you click on that, it takes you to each of these content. You have an option of each of these content areas. So let's have a look at humanities. And then in humanities, I am specifically going to work with the history teachers. And there it is. I can download this resource that says, hey, here's the numeracy that history involves. So I'm going to read this as a numeracy leader, and I'm going to get my head around how can I sell this whole numeracy thing to the history teacher. And this is how, because I'm going to know what the numeracy is that's in history. And this is going to help the students to develop their understanding of history through numeracy and through their knowledge of what happens with numeracy in history. So here it is, numeracy in history, gives you a whole big blurb about it. And down the bottom, it tells you which sub-elements might be relevant for these teachers. So the sub-elements go back to the learning progressions. So for here, we're looking at quantifying numbers, operating with percentages, comparing units, and the paragraph above says why these things would be useful. So history, we're talking timelines, all of those types of things. This is such a great resource when you're working with trying to get numeracy across the disciplines. You could use this yourself to upskill yourself and I guess sharpen your persuasion techniques when you're working with other members from other KLAs, or you can provide the members from the other KLAs with this document that you can print off from the website. So it gives information about, say, for qualifying numbers, how does this specifically relate to history? The only thing with this document is that it links back to the Australian curriculum. So you can see there, targeted achievement standard, student sequent events, and they're saying that's year 7 because it matches year 7 in the Australian curriculum. It's not a big deal, but it would be nice if someone spent their whole holidays mapping it to the Victorian curriculum, just saying. But it's just such a great resource for you to help to bring other KLAs on board. Okay, so that was your present to the secondary numeracy leaders. Someone asked about implementing numeracy in English. There is the reverse. There's the how to implement English in numeracy, but I haven't seen the numeracy in English one. Sorry. Would love you to create one and share it though. All right. Present number 4. This is for maths leaders who find themselves wanting to build the capacity of teachers in their school to work out what is on the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide and how can I use this to help me be a more effective teacher of numeracy. So you're going to go down to, on the numeracy portal, you're going to scroll down to this Maths and Numeracy Professional Learning, and you're going to click on there. There are 2 resources here. One is for if I have an individual teacher who says they're not really confident in teaching maths, I can direct individual teacher to this resource. That's the one I'm going to talk about first. The other one is I am going to be running a whole school PD or a whole PLC PD around the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide. What are the resources that I can use to support me to do that? Glad you asked. I'm about to show you. So the first one is for individual teachers. So you'll go on the Maths and Numeracy Professional Learning. There is a button there that says an open educational resource. So what this links to another page, and it's a self-paced course for teaching you how to teaching everything there is to know about the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide. It's really useful and it steps you through each of the areas. So an example, I've just blown this one up. So week 1, the evidence base. And so there are different activities that you can engage in to familiarise yourself with what is this part of the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide, how might it teach me to be a more effective teacher. So the example here, so 1.3, the activity is characteristics of effective numeracy teaching and how to develop numeracy, how to develop rich numeracy tasks. And I know someone was asking about that last week. So they read a little bit, they watch this video, and then there's a reflective prompt below. So it's self-paced, doesn't get reported anywhere. No one knows what you did or what you didn't do. It's just work your way through it to build your own confidence and competence in teaching numeracy. So I think that's a really great resource, and it's just always sitting there. So anyone can access it even outside of the department. Okay, the second resource, this is I have a group of teachers and I want to increase their familiarity with what's available on the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide. How can I do that? So on the numeracy, on that the PD part of the numeracy portal, there's this page and you'll go down here to the Numeracy Guide Professional Learning modules. So basically all of the work has been done for you. All you have to do, actually, I was going to say all you have to do is stand up and say the words. Sometimes you don't even have to say the words. There's audio on there. So what this is this resource, it takes you to Fuse, and then you can just work out which year level am I working with. So is it Birth Level 2? Is it Level 3 to 8? Is it Level 9 and 10? Or am I working with a group of parents? And once you work that out, then you can download the PowerPoint, the whole entire PowerPoint, everything you need to run a PD session on the kit, on the guide. So let's have a look at it. So you can see here, they've got all the slides done for you. Down the bottom, they have really extensive speaker notes to tell you what to say, also to give you an idea about the activities that you might engage in. So they're not, it's definitely not sort of stand and deliver me talking for 55 minutes. It is, talk about this and then engage in this activity, a turn and talk, or do this and then watch this video and then talk about this. So on the actual slides, you could say what's in the speaker notes down there. If you're not confident with that, there's an audio button where the team who put this together have recorded themselves saying all the information that needs to be said for that slide. So you could sit back and just put your feet up, nearly. someone needs to advance the slides, don't they? So I think this is a really useful resource. It's all, obviously you don't have to use every slide. You can download it and then use only the slides that you want to use, or focus just on the area of the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy guide that you want to focus on. But it's there and it's available for all levels. So, and I'm sure the school will be very impressed with all of your preparation if you pull this PowerPoint out and start talking about it. Okay, that's all the present's done. So lots of resources, lots of things to get familiar with, and I'm hoping that they are the resources that are going to help you in your role as a numeracy leader. So I am going to pause, give you some time to think and reflect, and share your thinking about what's at the top of your head now. What other resources might you want, or would you like access to, or know more about? And then we'll be back in 3 minutes, and I have my book recommendations coming up. So that'll certainly fill up your holiday reading stack. Okay, so we'll be back in 3 minutes. I'd love to see your thinking in the chat. Okay, great to see how eager you are to go and look at all of those resources and spend some time maybe over the holidays or in your own free time or in your school time looking at those resources. There's so many things, and I think really well supported now to go out and do great things. Just a matter of finding them. But with that map that we now have access to, I think that'll make it easier. Okay, so here are my book recommendations. Come on, guys. This has got to be everyone's favorite part, yeah? All right, so the first one is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. So all my book recommendations are leadership focused tonight, because I feel like that is the area where people are saying we want some more support and ideas. Simon Sinek, he did the TED Talk that I referred to last time. Hopefully a few of you have watched it. And he talks about, basically creating the vision. He talks a little bit about the guiding coalition. He doesn't refer to it as a guiding coalition, but he talks about the people in change. It's got lots of practical examples of different companies and the way they've led change, and talks about, the different ways that you can communicate to different people to get them on board with whatever it is that you're trying to lead. So start with why. That's why I started with that book, because he said so. The second one is switch, how to change when change is hard. This, when I was referring earlier to getting your head around lots of different models and approaches to change, this provides a different model again. So in here, they talk about the elephant and the rider. They say that in our minds, we've sort of got two systems. We've got the elephant and the rider. The elephant runs on emotion. The rider runs on data and information. And so when we're working with people, we should work out, are they more emotion-driven or are they more data-driven? And sometimes each of those, the elephants frustrate the riders and the riders frustrate the elephants. So it's just, they explain it in much more effectively than I have just done there. But there's also a YouTube clip you can watch. It's about 2 minutes, the rider and the elephant theory. And the final one is, I think I've shared this one before, leading change in your school, how to conquer myths, build commitment and get results. Now, you don't need to be taking on a principal role to be reading this book. This is Douglas Reeves. I think it's really useful for just any change that you're leading in a school. And he talks in here a lot about Cotys. He doesn't refer to Cotys' 8 steps, but essentially he moves through the 8 steps and gives examples of different parts that you can focus on when you're working in the 8 steps. I read part of the first chapter to the principal group that was called Pull the Weeds Before You Plant the Flowers. And he talks in there about this idea of initiative fatigue, that teachers were tired of having a new thing and a new thing and a new thing and a new thing. So he has a suggestion of having a garden party to pull the weeds before you plant the flowers. And hopefully whatever you're leading in your role as a numeracy leader is considered a flower and not a weed. But you have to read the book to understand what I'm talking about. The other resources I want to draw attention to, obviously you now have the resource kit for numeracy leaders. So all of the resources are in there, are pretty much available on the numeracy portal, but it is nice to have that hard copy. I highly recommend you go to the Basto numeracy suite to have a look and see what are the PD options for you as a numeracy leader next year. There are lots of different options that are happening that Basto are providing for numeracy teachers or numeracy leaders. So get onto the Basto website, and I think we might send a link out to that with the slides as well. And on that site, if you could engage in the numeracy needs analysis tool, that'll help us to work out what PD you would like to see offered in the future. And you'll also get a little printout, so you could probably do a pre and post to compare your own learning over time. So lots of resources to move forward as numeracy leaders. That brings us to the end of our session and the end of our 3 sessions. So thank you all for joining us. It has been lovely to have you. Do keep the conversation going in the chat. Come back to that and, continually add to it. So I'm hoping that you feel that you're set up and that you're put in the right direction for achieving great things in your role as a numeracy leader, and might see you again in some other webinars in the future. So there's the success criteria, and I wish you all a good night.